Pay rent or get out. Those were the words my father chose while I was lying in a hospital bed in Mesa, Arizona. Bruised, stitched, and barely conscious after a serious accident. When I told him I couldn't pay rent from a hospital bed, he slapped me. I hit the floor. The monitors started screaming. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. To my father, I wasn't his daughter. I was overdue rent. My name is Naomi Carter. I'm 29 years old. And this is the story of how my own father tried to break me when I was at my weakest, and how his obsession with money ultimately destroyed everything he tried to protect. 3 days earlier, a drunk driver ran a red light and crashed into my car on the driver's side. The doctors said I was lucky to survive. 3 broken ribs, a concussion, stitches across my forehead. But lying in that hospital room in Mesa, listening to the slow rhythm of machines keeping me alive, I understood something I'd spent years trying not to see. My father, Harold Carter, had never cared about my safety, only about control. Ever since my mother, Susan Carter, died, money had become the center of our relationship. I paid my own way through college while living under his roof. By my mid-20s, I was covering most of the household expenses while he called it responsibility. So when he stood over me in that hospital room, demanding rent instead of asking if I was okay, something inside me finally went quiet. Because while he believed I was broken, injured, dependent, and trapped, he had no idea that this moment would force me to look back at everything he'd taken. And once I did, there was no going back. The hospital room in Mesa, Arizona was too bright for grief. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, washing everything in the same pale glow. White sheets, white walls, white bandages wrapped around my ribs. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and plastic, a sterile calm that felt completely disconnected from the pain pulsing through my body. I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting my breaths the way the nurse had taught me, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Every inhale burned. Every exhale reminded me that I was still alive. Then the door opened. My father stepped inside. He didn't rush to my side. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He stood near the foot of the bed, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room as if he were annoyed by the inconvenience of being there. "The rent is due," he said. For a second, I thought I was still concussed. The words didn't register. I had been brought into this hospital on a stretcher 3 days earlier after a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into my car. The doctors said another few inches, and the steering column would have crushed my chest. "I'm in the hospital," I said slowly. My throat was dry, my voice barely above a whisper. "That doesn't change the calendar," he replied. "The first was 3 days ago." I closed my eyes. I had been unconscious on the first. On the second, I couldn't even sit up without vomiting from the pain. "I don't have the money right now," I said. "I'll pay when I'm discharged." His jaw tightened. "You always say that, Naomi." The way he said my name carried no warmth, no concern. It sounded like a warning. $800, he continued. "You live in my house. You follow my rules." I shifted slightly, wincing as pain shot through my side. "I almost died," I said. "Doesn't that matter at all?" Something flickered across his face. Annoyance, not fear. "Don't try to manipulate me," he snapped. "You think you're special because you're hurt?" The words settled heavily in the room. I thought of my mother, Susan Carter, gone for nearly 15 years now. After she died, everything in our house had changed. The warmth disappeared first, then the patience. What remained was structure, rigid, unforgiving, expensive. By 18, I was paying my own tuition while living under his roof. By 25, I was covering most of the household bills while he complained endlessly about money. He called it responsibility. I called it survival. "I can't pay from a hospital bed," I said quietly. That was when he hit me. The slap was sharp and loud, a sudden crack that echoed against the tiled walls. My head snapped to the side. I lost my balance and fell off the bed, landing hard on my shoulder. Pain exploded through my ribs as my IV line tore free. Blood filled my mouth. The heart monitor screamed. I lay there stunned, staring at the floor, trying to breathe without screaming. My father looked down at me, his expression cold and controlled. "You've got 3 days," he said. "Pay what you owe or get out." A nurse stood frozen near the doorway, eyes wide. After a moment, she turned away and hurried down the hall, pretending she hadn't seen anything. My father turned and walked out. Behind him, his wife Pamela hovered briefly, clutching her purse to her chest. She didn't ask if I was okay. She never did. To her, I was a problem, one that refused to disappear. When the orderlies finally rushed in and helped me back onto the bed, I felt strangely calm. Not safe, not relieved. Clear. This wasn't stress. This wasn't grief. This wasn't a man overwhelmed by circumstances. This was who my father had always been. For years, I had told myself that if I just worked harder, paid more, stayed quieter, things would improve, that he would soften, that one day I would finally earn peace. Lying there under harsh hospital lights, blood dried on my lips, I understood how wrong I had been. My father didn't want a daughter. He wanted control. And the moment I stopped being useful, he was willing to discard me completely. As the machines around me settled back into a steady rhythm, I stared at the ceiling and made a silent decision. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to argue. If he wanted to turn our relationship into a transaction, then I would start looking very closely at the books. Because people who demand rent at a hospital bed are usually hiding far more than unpaid bills. I was discharged 3 days later with a small white bag of painkillers and a stack of instructions I barely had the strength to read. No lifting, no twisting, no driving for at least 2 weeks. The nurse walked me to the exit and asked if someone was coming to pick me up. "My brother," I said, even though I hadn't heard from him. She nodded politely, the way people do when they sense something complicated but don't ask. Logan showed up 20 minutes late, leaning against his car like this was an inconvenience squeezed between errands. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He just unlocked the doors and waited. The drive back to my father's house was quiet. Mesa passed by outside the window, strip malls, palm trees, wide roads baked dry by the sun. Everything looked the same. That was the unsettling part. Life didn't pause just because something inside you had broken. "You know Dad's serious about the rent," Logan said finally. "He's been in a mood." I stared straight ahead. "I was unconscious for 2 days." He shrugged. "Still." When we pulled into the driveway, he cut the engine and held out his hand. "Gas money," he said. I gave him $10 because arguing hurt too much. The front door opened before I reached it. Pamela stood there, smiling too quickly. "Oh, you're home already," she said, as if I'd returned early from a vacation instead of a hospital bed. Inside, the house felt unfamiliar, not rearranged exactly, just subtly wrong. A different smell in the air, new throw pillows on the couch, shoes by the door that weren't mine. My father's voice drifted from the kitchen. "Did she bring the money?" Pamela didn't answer. I made my way down the hallway toward my room, moving slowly, carefully. The pain flared with each step, but something else tightened in my chest before I even reached the door. My key didn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. Pamela appeared behind me, her voice light. "Oh, Harold had the locks changed while you were gone." My stomach dropped. "Why?" I asked. She tilted her head, studying me. "He said it was better this way. Less confusion." "Confusion about what?" She didn't respond. She just handed me a folded piece of paper, a typed notice. "Notice to vacate 72 hours. My name sat at the top like it didn't belong there. "You can get your things once the rent is settled," Pamela said gently, as if explaining a store policy. "Harold doesn't want any scenes." My legs felt weak. "I live here," I said. "You did," she corrected. My father stepped into the hallway then, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You heard her," he said. 3 days. "I just got out of the hospital," I said. "I need my laptop, my clothes, my documents." "You'll get them when you pay," he replied. "Otherwise, they stay where they are." I looked past him, down the hall, at the door to the room I had paid for month after month. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "Because I'm done carrying you." Something inside me went very quiet. I turned and walked back toward the front door, my bag still on my shoulder, my life suddenly reduced to what I could carry. Outside, the heat hit me hard. I stood on the porch for a moment, dizzy, trying to steady myself. That was when I heard a gate creak. "Naomi?" Mrs. Alvarez, the woman who lived next door, stood halfway down her driveway, concern etched across her face. She had known my mother, used to bring over food after the funeral, used to check on me when my father was busy. She took one look at my face and gasped. "Come sit," she said. "You're not okay." I followed her slowly into her shaded backyard, lowering myself onto a bench beneath a mesquite tree. She brought water, then a chair for herself. "They changed the locks," I said quietly. Her lips pressed together. I wondered when he'd do that. That sentence told me everything. "I have a spare room," she said after a moment. "Just for a night or two, until you figure things out." I looked at her, overwhelmed. "Thank you," I whispered. That night, lying awake in a room that smelled faintly of lavender and old books, I replayed everything in my head. The slap, the notice, the way my father hadn't hesitated. This wasn't sudden. It was planned, and plans leave trails. As the house settled into silence around me, I reached for my phone and did something I hadn't done in years. I checked my credit. What I found there would change everything. I didn't sleep much that night. Mrs. Alvarez's guest room was small but warm, the kind of place that carried the quiet history of a life lived carefully. A crocheted blanket lay folded at the end of the bed. A framed photo of her late husband sat on the dresser, dusted and straightened with care. I lay on my side, ribs aching, phone glowing softly in my hands. The credit report loaded slowly. At first, everything looked normal. My checking account, my student loan, the credit card I'd had since college. Then I scrolled, and my stomach dropped. 3 accounts I didn't recognize. 2 credit cards, 1 store card. All opened within the last 6 months. All active. All maxed out. My fingers trembled as I tapped into the details. The balances stared back at me. Numbers far too large to be a mistake. Thousands of dollars in charges. Payments made sporadically, just enough to keep the accounts alive. The billing address was my father's house. I sat up too quickly and hissed in pain, pressing a hand against my side. This wasn't an accident. I called the first number listed on the report. After 20 minutes on hold, a representative answered, her voice bright and practiced. "Yes, Ms. Carter," she said. "Your account is past due." "I didn't open that account," I replied. There was a pause. "Well," she said carefully, "the application was completed using your social security number and your home address." My father's address. I hung up and called the second company. Same answer, different balance. By the time I reached the third, my hands were cold, my thoughts sharp in a way painkillers couldn't dull. Someone had been living in my name. I stared at the ceiling, the realization settling into place piece by piece. Pamela's paperwork on the kitchen table, the way she'd hidden it when I walked in, the ease with which my father talked about money that wasn't his. They hadn't just pushed me out. They had been preparing for it. In the early morning light, I called my friend Renee. She picked up groggy but alert the moment she heard my voice. "Something's wrong," I said. "Can you check something for me?" Within an hour, she had confirmed it. Multiple inquiries on my credit, addresses updated without my knowledge, cards delivered to my father's house. "This is identity theft," she said bluntly, "and it's organized." I thanked her and hung up, my chest tight. Mrs. Alvarez knocked softly on the door a few minutes later, holding a mug of coffee. "You look pale," she said. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her face growing harder with each detail. When I finished, she set the mug down carefully. "I've seen this before," she said quietly. "Men like your father think their children are extensions of themselves. Assets." That word again. Assets. I spent the rest of the day on the phone. Fraud departments, credit bureaus, identity theft hotlines. By evening, I had frozen my credit and filed reports. It felt surreal, dismantling a version of myself that had been quietly abused while I was busy surviving. That night, I received a message from my brother, Logan. "Dad says you're causing trouble. He says the cards were for emergencies." I stared at the screen. "Whose emergencies?" I typed, then deleted it. Instead, I saved the message. Documentation. Mrs. Alvarez offered to let me stay another night. I accepted, knowing I wasn't ready to face the house or my father again. The following afternoon, something unexpected happened. Pamela posted a photo online. She was smiling, sitting at a cafe in Scottsdale, shopping bags at her feet. The caption read, "Retail Therapy." I zoomed in on the photo. The purse on her lap was expensive, the kind of thing I'd never bought for myself, even when I could afford it. I checked the credit card statement again. There it was. Same date, same amount. Something inside me went still. This wasn't just financial abuse. It was theft carried out casually, confidently, under the assumption that I would never look. That night, sitting at Mrs. Alvarez's kitchen table, I opened a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote one word: timeline. Dates, accounts, charges, addresses. Patterns began to form almost immediately. And patterns, once seen, are impossible to ignore. As the sun set over Mesa, casting long shadows across the quiet street, I realized something that made my pulse steady instead of race. My father thought I was weak because I was injured. He thought I was distracted because I was hurt. He was wrong. I wasn't falling apart. I was finally paying attention. The house looked ordinary from the outside. Same pale stucco walls, same desert landscaping, same driveway my father had insisted I help pay for because we all live here. If someone passed by, they would never guess what had been happening behind those walls. That was the part that stayed with me. Normal was the disguise. I waited until late afternoon when Pamela usually posted her coffee photos and my father was at one of his appointments. Mrs. Alvarez watched from her kitchen window as I crossed the yard, moving slowly, carefully, every step a reminder that my body was still healing. The back window of my old room had always stuck. My father never bothered to fix it. He said it built character to work around imperfections. I pushed gently. It slid open with a soft scrape. Climbing inside sent pain flaring through my ribs, but I bit down and kept moving. I landed awkwardly on the carpet and froze, listening. Nothing. No voices, no television, no footsteps. My room looked like it had been searched, not cleaned. Drawers left open, boxes tipped over. The bed stripped of my sheets. The absence of my laptop was immediate and obvious. They hadn't locked me out. They had gone through everything. I knelt slowly and lifted the loose floorboard near the wall, the one I'd hidden things under since college. My old backup laptop was still there, dusty but untouched. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I tucked it under my arm and stepped into the hallway. I knew I shouldn't go any farther. I went anyway. My father's office door was closed. The same framed desert photograph hung slightly crooked on the wall outside it. I remembered my mother hating that picture, saying it made the room feel dry. Something clicked. The frame came off easily. Behind it was the safe. My hands shook as I dialed the combination. My mother's birthday. It opened without resistance. Inside were folders labeled neatly, as if organization could disguise intent. Bank statements, insurance documents, legal correspondence. I pulled one out at random and felt my chest tighten. Life insurance policy, Susan Carter. The number was unreal. 7 figures. I flipped through the pages, my pulse roaring in my ears. The policy was clear. The funds were to be held in trust for her children, accessible for education and living expenses once we reached adulthood. I had never seen a cent of it. Neither had Logan. Instead, there were transfer records, withdrawals, accounts I didn't recognize, notes in my father's handwriting explaining temporary reallocations. Temporary. Years had passed. Then I found the letter, dated a week before my mother died, from her doctor. A warning about interactions between her heart medication and a supplement that could cause fatal complications. The supplement bottle was in the safe. Prescribed 2 days after the warning. My hands went numb. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew it wasn't nothing. I photographed everything. The policy, the transfers, the letter. My phone buzzed with a notification, startling me. Pamela had posted again. Heading home. My heart slammed against my ribs. I closed the safe, rehung the frame, and grabbed the nearest item I hadn't noticed before. A small USB drive tucked into a folder marked 2018. I slipped it into my pocket without thinking. Footsteps echoed in the driveway. I moved fast, pain screaming, slipping back down the hall and out the window just as the front door opened. I didn't stop until I was back in Mrs. Alvarez's kitchen, shaking, breathless, the backup laptop and USB drive on the table between us. She took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. "Sit," she said firmly. That night, as the desert cooled and the street outside fell silent, I opened the laptop. The USB drive mounted automatically. Folders appeared. Years, accounts, emails. This wasn't a mistake. It was a system, and my father had never expected me to see it. As the screen glowed softly in the dark, I felt something settle into place. This wasn't about getting my room back. It was about understanding exactly how much had been taken. And once you understand that, there's no pretending nothing happened. I didn't sleep that night. Mrs. Alvarez went to bed early, leaving a small lamp on in the kitchen for me. The house settled into its familiar nighttime creaks, the kind that make a place feel lived in rather than lonely. I sat at the table with the backup laptop open, the USB drive resting beside it like a quiet confession. When I finally plugged it in, the screen flickered, then filled with folders. Not chaotic, not careless. Organized. Years labeled neatly. Subfolders by month, spreadsheets with color-coded notes, email chains saved as PDFs. Whoever had built this system expected to keep it running for a long time. I opened the first spreadsheet. My stomach tightened. Income listed in one column didn't match deposits shown in another. There were regular transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, some domestic, some clearly overseas. Notes in the margins explained timing, thresholds, and how to avoid attention. This wasn't someone struggling. This was someone planning. I clicked through emails next, messages between my father and people whose names meant nothing to me. Discussions about moving funds, about keeping Naomi dependent, about how family arrangements made certain things easier. One email stood out: Trust Management Strategy. It outlined ways to access funds meant for minors by claiming sole authority after a spouse's death. The language was clinical, almost polite, but the meaning was unmistakable. My hands started to shake. This wasn't something he'd done out of grief. This was something he'd prepared for. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes as memories rearranged themselves. The constant rent demands, the way he discouraged me from moving out, the insistence that I keep my address at the house even after I offered to change it. He hadn't wanted me close. He'd needed me accessible. My phone buzzed softly on the table, a text from Logan. Dad says you're blowing this out of proportion. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I reached a name I hadn't called since I was a teenager. Uncle Victor, my mother's younger brother. My father had cut him off after the funeral, calling him a bad influence, saying he filled my head with questions. I pressed call before I could overthink it. He answered on the third ring. Naomi? His voice cracked slightly. Is everything okay? No, I said, but I think you should know something. There was a long pause after I explained. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. I've been waiting for you to see this, he said. The next afternoon, we met at a small diner just off the highway. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, but his eyes were sharp. He slid a manila envelope across the table. I kept copies, he said. Your mother asked me to. Inside were documents I had never seen, correspondence with a lawyer, notes my mother had written herself, dates, questions, concerns about finances she couldn't reconcile. She was planning to leave him, Uncle Victor said quietly. She found evidence of gambling, of hidden accounts. She hired a lawyer. My chest tightened. The first meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks after she died, he added. The lawyer's name was familiar. Michael Reyes, still practicing, still in Mesa. That evening, I sat across from Michael Reyes in his office, the USB drive and envelope laid out neatly between us. He listened without interruption, flipping through documents, his expression growing more serious by the minute. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. This is not a misunderstanding, he said. This is long-term financial abuse and fraud. I nodded. What do we do? I asked. We slow down, he replied. We document everything, and we let him believe nothing has changed. As I left the office, the desert sky glowing orange and pink above the city, something inside me felt different. Not lighter, stronger. I wasn't scrambling anymore. I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. Back at Mrs. Alvarez's house, I added a new page to my notebook. People who knew. People who helped. People who benefited. The list wasn't long yet, but it was growing. And for the first time since the hospital, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about proving my father wrong. It was about making the truth undeniable. And once truth takes shape, it doesn't shrink back into silence. Michael Reyes was careful with his words. What you have, he told me, tapping the folder lightly, is enough to destroy him, but only if we do this the right way. I nodded. By then I understood what the right way meant. Not confrontation, not anger, documentation. For the next 2 weeks, I lived quietly. Too quietly. I stopped responding to my father's messages entirely. I didn't ask about my things. I didn't argue about rent. I let him believe that forcing me out had worked, that I was hurt, overwhelmed, and scrambling to survive. In reality, I was doing the opposite. Every morning, I sat at Mrs. Alvarez's kitchen table with my laptop open and my notebook beside it. I logged calls, saved emails, took screenshots. Michael showed me how to request records legally, credit reports, tax transcripts, public filings. Patterns began to emerge with uncomfortable clarity. Accounts opened shortly after my mother's death, large transfers labeled as temporary that were never returned, tax filings that listed dependents long after they'd moved out. Nothing about it was sloppy. It was systematic. One afternoon, Michael called me unexpectedly. "There's something else," he said. "Your father has been claiming disability benefits." I felt a chill. "For what?" I asked. "Chronic back pain," he replied. "According to his filings, he's been unable to work for years." Images flashed through my mind. My father hauling boxes in the garage, playing golf on weekends, boasting about side jobs. "That can't be right," I said. "That's what I thought," Michael replied. "But here's the thing. He's still listed as insured on your car policy." I understood immediately. The next day, I logged into the insurance portal. My father had kept me on the policy for the multi-car discount, never bothering to remove me. That gave me access. Inside the account was a usage-based driving program, a tracker meant to reward safe drivers. It logged dates, mileage, and locations. I downloaded everything. 5 years of data. 5 years of daily movement. Trips to job sites. Long drives on days he claimed he couldn't leave his bed. Michael didn't smile when I showed him. He didn't need to. "This turns a civil case into something much larger," he said. "Federal." While the legal machinery began to move quietly into place, my personal life shifted in small, unexpected ways. Renee helped me find temporary remote work, just enough to cover my expenses without drawing attention. Mrs. Alvarez refused to accept rent, insisting I focus on healing. She checked my stitches every morning like a quiet ritual. "You're not alone," she said more than once. That mattered more than she knew. Meanwhile, my father grew louder. Logan called me one evening, voice strained. "Dad says agencies are asking questions," he said. "He says you're behind it." "I didn't do anything illegal," I replied calmly. "That's not what I meant," Logan said. "He's scared." The word surprised me. My father didn't scare easily. That night, Pamela made a mistake. She opened another card in my name. This time, the bank flagged it immediately. The fraud department called me directly. "Ms. Carter," the agent said, "we believe someone attempted to open an account using your identity." I thanked her and forwarded the report to Michael. "This is what we needed," he said. "A clean trigger." From there, things accelerated. The IRS whistleblower paperwork was submitted. The Social Security Administration received the disability evidence. A civil complaint for trust mismanagement was drafted but not yet filed. Michael was clear. "Once we file," he said, "there's no stopping it." I understood. That evening, sitting alone in the guest room, I opened a folder on my laptop labeled After. I didn't know exactly what would come next, where I would live, how long this would take, what it would cost emotionally. But I knew one thing for certain. I was done reacting. For years, my life had been shaped by someone else's rules, someone else's demands, someone else's version of reality. Now every step was deliberate, every move documented, every silence intentional. My father still believed he was in control. He still believed I was weak, injured, displaced. He had no idea that the most dangerous thing I had done wasn't leaving the house. It was paying attention. And once attention turns into evidence, there's no way to look away. The first crack showed up in my voicemail. It was my father's voice, but it didn't sound like him. Not sharp, not controlled. It was strained, rushed, as if he'd recorded it while pacing. "Naomi," he said, "we need to talk. You're misunderstanding things." He didn't say my name often anymore. Hearing it now felt rehearsed. I didn't call him back. Instead, I saved the message. 2 days later, Logan showed up at Mrs. Alvarez's house without warning. His car idled in the driveway longer than necessary before he finally knocked. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, hands shoved deep into his pockets. "They're asking questions," he said the moment I opened the door. "The bank, some tax office. I don't even know who all of them are." I stepped aside and let him in. "They asked about me," he continued, voice tight, "about whether Dad still supports me, about why he claimed me as a dependent when I moved out years ago." I watched him carefully. "I didn't know," he said quickly. "I swear, I never saw any of the paperwork." "I believe you," I said, and I did. He exhaled shakily, collapsing into a chair at the kitchen table. "He keeps saying this is all your fault, that you're doing this to punish him." I didn't respond. Logan rubbed his face with both hands. "They told me if I cooperate, I won't be charged." The word hung between us. Cooperate. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "Everything I knew," he said, which wasn't much, but enough. That night, Michael Reyes emailed me. "We received confirmation. Logan's testimony is on record." I closed my laptop slowly. The next person to crack surprised me. Pamela. She called from a blocked number just after midnight. I almost didn't answer. When I did, her voice came through thin and unsteady. "He lied to me," she said without preamble, "about all of it." I leaned back against the headboard listening. "He said the accounts were temporary," she continued, "that the money belonged to the family, that you knew." "Did I?" I asked quietly. Silence. "I can't go to prison," she whispered. "I won't." "That depends," I replied calmly, "on what you're willing to tell the truth about." She started crying then, not quietly, not gracefully. Panic leaked into every word. "I have emails," she said, "messages, voice recordings. He made me keep everything. He said it was protection." "Protection for who?" I asked. "For him," she admitted. We met 2 days later at a nearly empty cafe on the edge of town. Pamela looked smaller than I remembered, her confidence stripped away. She slid her phone across the table with shaking hands. Inside were messages spelling everything out. Instructions, reassurances, warnings about audits and how to stall them. One voice memo stopped me cold. My father's voice, irritated and sharp. "If anyone asks, you say I handle the finances. You don't think. You don't explain. You just follow instructions." Pamela stared at the table as I listened. "I didn't think he'd turn on me," she said quietly. "They always do," I replied. "I sent everything to Michael." His response came minutes later. "This removes every remaining defense." Meanwhile, my father unraveled publicly. Mrs. Alvarez reported shouting matches late into the night, doors slamming, long silences followed by sudden bursts of anger. The house that once ran on rigid rules now ran on fear. One afternoon, as I worked quietly on my laptop, my phone buzzed again. "Unknown number." I answered. "You think you're clever," my father said, his voice low and trembling with fury. "You think you've trapped me." "I didn't trap you," I said evenly. "I told the truth." "You owe me," he snapped, "after everything I did for you." There it was. "I paid," I said, "in rent, in silence, in years of my life." He hung up. I didn't feel victorious. I felt done. By the end of the week, Michael filed an amended report. Pamela's cooperation sealed it. Logan's testimony confirmed it. The case shifted. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a record. And records don't care about excuses. That night, I sat alone on Mrs. Alvarez's porch, watching the desert sky darken. The air cooled. A single streetlight flickered on. I realized something then. The most dangerous moment isn't when someone fights you. It's when the people around them stop protecting their lies. Because once loyalty breaks, everything follows. The first letter arrived without drama. No raised voices, no slammed doors. Just an envelope taped neatly to the front door. Mrs. Alvarez sent me a photo before she even knocked. Certified mail, government notice. My father had tried to ignore it. She told me later that he'd stood there staring at the envelope for a long moment, as if refusing to touch it might make it disappear. It didn't. Michael Reyes called me an hour later. "The IRS has opened a formal audit," he said. 5 years to start. They've already flagged discrepancies that could push it much further back. I closed my eyes slowly. "And Social Security?" I asked. "They've acknowledged receipt of the disability evidence," he replied. "That review will move faster than the audit." For the first time since the hospital, my hands stopped shaking. Not because I felt safe, because the outcome was no longer personal. It was procedural. My father didn't call me that day, or the next. But pressure has a way of leaking into public spaces. Neighbors noticed unfamiliar cars parked along the street, men in dark jackets walking up to the house, leaving cards, returning again. Mrs. Alvarez described the atmosphere as tight, like the air before a storm. Pamela stopped coming home. Logan's car vanished from the driveway entirely. The house that once functioned on rules and fear now felt hollow. The knock came early one morning. 2 agents stood on the porch, badges visible, expressions neutral. "Is Harold Carter home?" He wasn't. They left cards. They came back. Within days, the questions spread outward. Banks calling, insurance companies verifying records, offices cross-checking information that had once been taken at face value. Michael forwarded me updates in short, precise messages. Audit expanded, accounts flagged, multiple agencies coordinating. Meanwhile, my life continued quietly. The remote work Renee had helped me secure turned into steady income, enough to plan, not just survive. I worked from Mrs. Alvarez's dining table, then from a small shared office space, once my ribs healed enough to sit comfortably. I didn't talk about my father. I didn't need to. The work spoke for itself. The day Michael asked me to come in, his office felt different. The blinds were open. A thick file sat in the center of the table. "We're filing the civil case," he said. "Trust mismanagement, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty." I scanned the first page. The amount made my breath catch. "We're seeking full restitution," he continued, "plus damages." "And criminal?" I asked. "That's already in motion," he said. "We don't control it anymore." The papers were filed the next morning. My father was served at a strip mall coffee shop near his old job site. According to Mrs. Alvarez, he didn't yell. He didn't argue. He sat down slowly, staring at the documents as if they were written in a language he'd never learned. That night, my phone rang. I recognized the number. I let it go to voicemail. "You think this is justice," my father said in the message, his voice tight. "You have no idea what you've started." I saved it. Not out of anger, out of habit, because everything mattered now. A week later, Pamela was arrested. Identity theft, credit fraud, multiple counts. Mrs. Alvarez watched from her window as the police escorted her to the car. No handcuffs, no shouting. Just a woman walking carefully, like the ground might give way beneath her. My father didn't come outside. He didn't do anything. And that told me more than any confession. The house went dark after that. Lights off early, curtains drawn, the sound of pacing replaced by long stretches of silence. By the end of the week, Michael sent one final message. "Criminal charges are imminent." I stood at the window, watching the mesa sky fade from orange to deep blue, and felt something settle inside me. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about gravity. You can build your life pretending it doesn't apply to you. You can stand tall, demand rent, demand obedience, demand silence. But eventually, gravity pulls, and when it doesn't negotiate. It didn't happen in one dramatic moment. There was no shouting in the street, no police lights flashing through the windows at night. Instead, everything my father had built began to disappear quietly. The first thing to go was access. Logan texted me late one evening. Dad's debit card was declined at the grocery store. I stared at the message longer than necessary before setting my phone down. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was confirmation. The next morning, Mrs. Alvarez knocked softly on my door. "There are people outside," she whispered. "They're putting stickers on things." IRS agents moved through the house with methodical calm, not hurried, not emotional. They photographed rooms, opened drawers, placed small colored tags on items my father once bragged about. Electronics, tools, furniture he'd insisted were investments. By noon, a notice was taped to the front door. "Property subject to seizure." Sunlight hit the paper directly, bright and unforgiving. The neighborhood noticed. Cars slowed as they passed, curtains shifted. The story spread without words. The house that had once been so carefully controlled was now exposed. Michael called me that afternoon. The audit expanded to 15 years, he said. They found inconsistencies going back almost to the year your mother died. 15 years. I sat down slowly. That's not negligence, I said. No, Michael replied. That's intent. Social Security followed quickly. Disability payments were officially suspended pending full review. The estimated overpayment climbed rapidly once penalties and interest were added. Numbers that once felt abstract became concrete. Meanwhile, the civil case gained speed. The trust documentation was airtight, the language clear, the misuse undeniable. My father's attorney requested a continuance. Michael declined. The hearing date was set. That was when my father finally tried to reach me again. He showed up at Mrs. Alvarez's gate late one afternoon, his posture rigid, his face tight with a fury he could barely contain. "You think you've won," he said when I stepped outside. "You think this makes you powerful." I studied him quietly. "I didn't do this," I replied. "I stopped covering for you." He laughed sharply. "You wouldn't survive without me." I thought of the guest room, of the quiet mornings, of work that paid my bills without conditions. "I already am," I said. He didn't answer. He turned and walked away, shoulders hunched, his certainty leaking out of him with every step. The hearing was brief. The judge listened, reviewed documents, asked precise questions. My father sat silently, smaller than I remembered, his confidence reduced to folded hands and lowered eyes. The ruling came swiftly. Assets frozen, full restitution ordered, case referred for criminal prosecution. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Someone called my name, asked if I felt vindicated. I didn't stop walking. That night, Mrs. Alvarez brought over soup. We sat at the kitchen table in comfortable silence. "Your mother would be proud," she said finally. I swallowed hard. The following week, the house went dark. Utilities shut off, cars gone, furniture removed in stages. The place that had once defined my childhood now looked abandoned. Windows bare, driveway empty, the illusion of stability stripped away. Then came the charges. Tax evasion, fraud, identity theft conspiracy. Michael's voice was steady when he told me. "This will move fast now," he said. "There's too much evidence." I stood at the window watching the sun dip behind the desert horizon. Mesa glowed softly, unchanged, indifferent. My phone buzzed one last time, a voicemail from my father. "This didn't have to happen," he said. "You could have kept quiet." I deleted it, because the truth was, silence was the reason it had gone on so long. The collapse wasn't loud. It was thorough. Everything my father had controlled, money, narratives, people, had slipped out of his hands piece by piece, and once control is gone, there's nothing left to negotiate. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No raised voices, no gasps from the gallery, just the low murmur of paperwork and the steady rhythm of procedure. My father stood when instructed, his shoulders stiff, his gaze fixed somewhere above the judge's head. He didn't look at me. Not once. Maybe he couldn't. Or maybe he knew that if he did, he would lose the last illusion he had left. The charges were read carefully. Tax evasion, fraud, identity theft conspiracy, breach of fiduciary duty. Each word landed with a quiet finality. When the sentence was delivered, there was no reaction, no protest, no plea, just the sound of a gavel and a man being escorted away from a life he had built on control. Years, not a number meant to shock, a number meant to end something. Pamela took a plea deal, 18 months, full restitution. She cried as the judge spoke, nodding too quickly, apologizing to no one in particular. I felt nothing watching her, not anger, not relief, distance. Logan was granted probation and ordered to repay what he'd benefited from. He stood straighter than I'd ever seen him, his face stripped of bravado. Weeks later, he sent me a letter, not asking forgiveness, just acknowledging the truth. That was enough. The house was foreclosed quietly, no dramatic auction, no final confrontation, just paperwork, liens, and an empty driveway where cars used to sit. I never went back. My life moved forward in smaller ways. I rented a modest apartment on the east side of Mesa, sunlight in the mornings, quiet in the evenings, a place where no one demanded rent as proof of loyalty. The consulting work grew steadily, Not fast, not flashy, but honest. Clients came through referrals, through trust, built slowly. I helped people untangle financial messes, reclaim what had been taken, and rebuild without fear. I didn't tell them my story. I didn't need to. I visited my mother's grave one afternoon just before sunset. The desert air was warm, the sky stretched wide and forgiving. I brought yellow flowers, the ones she loved. "I'm okay," I told her quietly. I stopped it. Mrs. Alvarez joined me later that week for dinner. We sat outside as the heat faded, sharing soup and quiet laughter. She never asked for details. She didn't need them. Some people help without wanting explanations. Months passed. The anger dissolved first, then the vigilance. What remained was clarity, a life no longer built around anticipating someone else's demands. I didn't rebuild my relationship with my father. Some endings aren't meant to be rewritten. Instead, I built something else. A small fund, seeded with recovered money to help women who had been financially trapped by family. Emergency legal help, temporary housing, a way out. I didn't attach my name to it. The work mattered more than recognition. One evening, as I locked my office and stepped into the cooling desert air, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Your story helped me leave." I stared at the screen, then slipped the phone back into my pocket. Because the truth is, I didn't survive by being louder. I survived by refusing to disappear. The slap in the hospital didn't change who I was. It revealed what had always been broken. And once something broken is exposed, it can't keep pretending to hold you together. I went home that night, opened the window, and let the quiet in. No threats, no demands, no voices telling me what I owed. Just peace. And for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough.